On this Sunday night, pride and pain. The growing number of threats against the LGBTQ2+ community.
We were all scared. We were heartbroken.
A troubling trend in Canada and beyond. A potential flight path to more profits.
These are extraordinary circumstances.
Why business could soon soar for low-cost airlines. The mystery of long COVID.
They just were kind of like, come back in a few years and maybe we'll know more.
The mission to cure the suffering. And, rats. But that's not a bad thing.
We're hoping they can actually get closer to victims.
Training rodents to be lifesavers.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. June is typically a month of celebrations for the LGBTQ2+ community and its allies. But during this year's Pride events, there are stark reminders that hate still exists. This week, a drag show was canceled in Victoria after organizers received threats. And similar incidents have played out across the country and in the U.S. In our top story tonight, Mike Drolet examines this disturbing trend and what's being done to address it.
In northern Idaho, 31 suspected white nationalists wearing riot gear were arrested before they could disrupt a Pride event. And near San Francisco, more hate at a library's Drag Queen Story Hour.
Did you guys call the cops?
In the form of white power signs and homophobic slurs. LGBTQ activists expect a certain amount of hate every year during Pride Month, but there's been so much in 2022, it's proving difficult to track.
Yeah, you know, part of my work is trying to keep an eye on anti-2S LGBTQ hate, and it feels like it's just an onslaught right now.
And the incidents are not unique to the U.S. A Victoria drag show that was billed as family-friendly was canceled after the venue received threatening phone calls.
We were all scared. We were heartbroken.
In Regina, a rainbow-painted walkway and statue were defaced. And in Tillsonburg, Ontario, a threatening note sealed in a plastic bag was left next to torn pride flags. Still, the perception of an increase in pride-related hate is entirely anecdotal. In 2019, Statistics Canada estimated there were 223,000 self-reported hate crimes of all types in Canada. Yet law enforcement reported only 1,951 crimes during that same period, meaning less than 1% of perceived hate crimes were reported. What is far more evident to anti-hate groups is how homophobic and transphobic discussions have gone mainstream.
I could care less how you dress or what you call yourself. But this is not liberation. This is the dark ages.
Even Major League Baseball isn't immune. 5 members of the Tampa Bay Rays refused to wear the Pride logo on their uniforms, citing their religious beliefs and a worry they would be encouraging a gay lifestyle.
I think it's coming here, and it's something we're not ready to deal with or to meet head on. I'm really worried. What does it say if our community spaces aren't safe? That is a crisis point to me.
One of the goals of Pride is to remove stigmas around the LGBTQ community. Clearly, more work needs to be done. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Hearings on the U.S. Capitol riot will continue this week, and we're expecting to see more evidence of what the committee calls an attempted coup by former President Donald Trump. On Tuesday, state officials are going to speak about how they were pressured by Trump to overturn local election results in a desperate attempt to hold on to the White House. Jennifer Johnson has more, including how Trump is retaliating.
Former President Donald Trump is firing back at the January 6th committee, saying their findings could never be admitted in a court of law.
This is not a congressional investigation, this horrible situation that's wasting everyone's time.
In a speech before the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Trump took aim at his closest inner circle at the White House, former Vice President Mike Pence and former Attorney General Bill Barr, who testified Trump became detached from reality after losing the election.
I think what we're presenting before the American people certainly would rise to a level of criminal involvement by a president. I certainly think the president is guilty of knowing what he did, seditious conspiracy.
The committee is laying out a case that the former president demanded Vice President Pence not certify the election results on January 6th, and later tried to strong-arm election officials in several states to overturn results in their jurisdictions.
They clearly tried
to get the vice president to throw the actual votes out and replace electors with the losing candidate. And it looks like that's in the works for the next election as well. It's a grave concern.
Trump, twice impeached but never removed from office, is still claiming fraud cost him the election, as he teases he may run again for president in 2024.
I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
On Tuesday, former Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger will testify. After the 2020 election, he taped a phone call with Trump, where the former president asked him to find enough votes to illegally overturn the results in Georgia.
If someone has no respect for the rule of law and believes only in their own power in an obsessive, narcissistic way, there's little that can deter that person, but there are things that can fortify us against them, and that is an important part of the committee's work.
The bipartisan lawmakers hope to build a case for the Department of Justice to bring criminal charges against Trump. After a 10-month investigation, that's their goal, as Trump continues to declare his innocence. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
In Quebec, almost 200 people have been ordered out of their homes over fears of a landslide. Residents in this Saguenay neighborhood spent their Saturday night scrambling to pack up their belongings. Last Monday, a landslide swept away an empty house in the area, prompting a first round of evacuations. The fire department says the ground is still very unstable and could trigger a catastrophe. Saguenay's mayor says the evacuees could be out of their homes for months. Violent crime is on the rise in Manitoba's capital, with the number of homicides in Winnipeg now on track to surpass its annual record. And what's more worrying? An alarming number of young people, teenagers, are getting involved. Marnie Blunt reports tonight on the renewed urgency to help those most at risk.
Shootings, stabbings, and deadly assaults. Another year of violence gripping the city of Winnipeg.
We're seeing a spike in violent crime in Winnipeg right now.
As of mid-June, 25 Winnipeggers have lost their lives to violent crime, including Rebecca Contois, a young woman whose partial remains were found outside an apartment building in mid-May. And at the start of the year, a Winnipeg man found dead in his car in Assiniboine Park, resulting in a 15 and 17-year-old being charged with second-degree murder. Mitch Bourbonnier commits countless hours to outreach work. He says violent crime usually spikes in the summer months, but they're also seeing an uptick in young offenders and victims.
As the age of the people involved, we're seeing a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers involved in that right now. Kids are exposed to more earlier. They're out on their own, they're struggling, and we're just seeing younger and younger kids at risk.
The violence also prompting renewed calls for swifter action to be taken to protect the most vulnerable.
Manitoba, and especially Winnipeg, is coined as ground zero for violence against Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit community. So it is critical. It is a critical state that we're in right now.
With one nonprofit calling for a 24/7 safe space for those fleeing the violence.
We know one of the women who recently was murdered was looking for 24/7 safe space at the time.
As for Bourbonnier, he says he'll continue reaching out to those at risk and hopefully get them on the right path.
I'm not discouraged. I'm not tired. I'm not burnt out. I'm just working hard. We're all working hard. We're all doing our best.
Over the past 3 years, Winnipeg has seen climbing violent crime rates, breaking a record number of homicides in 2019 at 44, an alarming trend that only appears to be carrying over into 2022. Farah?
Thank you, Marnie. That's Marnie Blunt in Winnipeg for us tonight. With WestJet announcing plans, it will focus primarily on Western Canada. Flair Airlines now feels the sky's the limit. After clearing up concerns with federal authorities about whether or not it's Canadian-owned, industry observers say there is an opportunity for Flair to increase its market share. And as Anne Gaviola reports, it's poised to fly high during the summer travel boom with its ultra-low-cost fares.
Call it revenge travel, call it pent-up demand, whatever the name, people are itching to fly after years of uncertainty. An ultra-low-cost carrier, Flair Airlines, is set to capitalize on this travel boom.
What we're seeing is really strong bookings starting to come through for the summer period.
Airfares across the board are about 30% higher than in 2019, and discounts may be just the ticket for passengers feeling squeezed at the pumps and just about everywhere else.
If they can really keep costs low and offer out much cheaper ticket prices to consumers, I think that means they're going to get a lot of demand. And so I think the prospects are very good for airlines like Flair.
But it's a turbulent time for the industry. The Edmonton-based carrier, like its competition, is dealing with labor shortages and sky-high jet fuel costs.
These are extraordinary circumstances. We have the most efficient fleet, and therefore not only is that great for the environment, but it also means that for every mile flown, we'll burn less gas than our competitors.
And who can forget the headaches and delays passengers are dealing with at Pearson, the country's busiest airport. The federal government says it's hiring hundreds more employees to deal with travel volumes we haven't seen since pre-pandemic, but it's going to take time.
Go early, and that's the advice we're giving to all of our passengers. The issues at Pearson are complex and multidimensional.
This passenger rights advocate says the biggest beef with Flair is customer service.
I'm hearing a lot of complaints about people booking a flight for a given day, that flight getting canceled, and then being offered a flight 3, 4, 5, or 7 days later. That's unacceptable.
According to federal rules, because Flair is considered a small carrier, it isn't obligated to do more than that.
We're not perfect, that's for sure. I think Air Canada cancelled 10% of flights through Pearson the weekend before last. It's an industry-level problem.
Passengers should pack some patience, too. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
And coming up, from boats to planes to trains, the travel restrictions that are changing tomorrow. Plus, long COVID changes lives. One researcher's passion to help those with lingering symptoms. More changes are coming for travelers. Starting tomorrow, people boarding trains or planes in Canada will no longer have to show proof of vaccination. They'll still have to wear masks throughout their journey. The federal government says travelers coming to Canada, but who are starting their journey in another country, must still follow all requirements there for vaccinations and testing. That includes cruise ships. And new efforts are underway to unravel the mystery surrounding long COVID. Most people who contract COVID-19 fully recover, but about 10 to 20% of COVID survivors experience a variety of mid and long-term effects, according to the World Health Organization. And by those estimates, there could be at least 390,000 so-called long haulers in Canada. Now, the symptoms, they can range from fatigue to chest pain to anxiety and depression. As Ross Lord reports, researchers are working to gather more data and ease the trauma of those affected.
Amy Tenenbaum shook off the Omicron variant in January, or so she thought. A few weeks later, she developed breathing problems. Then she collapsed while walking home.
I had a really fast, rapid pounding heart, even at rest, and chest tightness, chest pain.
Combined with other symptoms like constant fatigue, Amy's long COVID forced her to give up her job as a server. Despite being double vaccinated with no underlying conditions, she can barely walk, forced to use a wheelchair to get around. From doctors, there's confusion.
They just were kind of like, well, we can't help you here. We don't know anything about it. Come back in a few years and maybe we'll know more.
Enter Carlos Hernandez Castillo, a researcher at Dalhousie University. Castillo plans to analyze brain imaging of long COVID victims, looking for patterns that could lead to public health guidelines on treatment.
So when somebody gets sick, the people in the hospital know what to do after and what they need to analyze or like maybe test in the patients to know if they need extra treatment or like follow-up.
It's tough slogging considering long haulers suffer from various combinations of more than a dozen symptoms. Everything from brain fog to unexplained bruising and rashes and unshakable exhaustion.
My speech will change. I slur or can't articulate.
Castillo hopes to coordinate his 2-year research project with similar studies being launched in Toronto, London, Ontario, and in Mexico.
We need to combine data from different sources to be able to find out those patterns. We want to make like a map of exactly which functions are getting affected from COVID.
Amy Tenenbaum just graduated from Dalhousie. She plans to pursue a graduate degree, her strength wavering but her spirit unbroken. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
sharing their stories ahead the vital human rights tasks being done overseas with the help of our journalists. As you may have noticed, one global national correspondent hasn't been on air much lately, and with good reason. Our Mike Armstrong is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, working with Journalists for Human Rights, a Canadian organization helping to train journalists while promoting human rights and gender equality. Here's a look at what Mike's been up to and what it's meant to him.
This has been an experience. From the minute you leave the airport and head downtown, you realize Kinshasa is a little different. There's a battle they have about 1 million times a day, and here it is, 2 cars fighting over 2 inches. This isn't an easy place to do a lot of things, including reporting. Well, over the last 2 months, I've been working with local journalists. A few of the newsrooms actually did stories on the seminars. I've also been in the field, shooting and editing stories with reporting teams. With CNTV, I visited an orphanage that might have to close. That would put these kids on the streets. With RTGA, we did a couple of stories about a fishing village. And with Digital Congo, we visited the local downtown market to talk about the same problem Canadians are struggling with, inflation. They're not happy either. The goal has been to maybe, hopefully, help. If you want to have a healthy democracy, you tend to need a healthy media. So Global kind of loaned 2 of its journalists out to Journalists for Human Rights. My colleague Rachel Gilmore from our online division has been working in Tunisia. Now, JHR is based in Toronto, but does work in several countries in Africa and the Middle East. They have all sorts of programs promoting equality and human rights. At its office in Kinshasa last month, it was training journalists to become human rights trainers themselves. And then 2 days later, those trainers delivered to other journalists. Just in my time here, there have been meetings with women's rights groups, conferences with news directors, and a meeting with government officials where JHR is trying to change the legal system so that women who are victims of sexual assault don't have to pay to press charges. It's hard to compare problems we might complain about in Canada with the ones people experience every day here. Prices may be exploding, but people in this country are already starving. About 30 million people here don't have enough to eat. Add to that violence from militias in eastern parts of the country and tensions with neighboring Rwanda. There is real fear things could spiral out of control. But through all of that, I've met men and women who work hard. Journalists who do the job under conditions I've had trouble believing. In newsrooms here, computers are a luxury. Even pens are hard to come by. And how about reading a live newscast with lights that never stop flickering? Well, they do it all with dedication and professionalism. Now, there is one thing I'll take home with me when I leave this weekend. It's something I pick up in every country I visit. Perspective. A reminder that Canada may not be perfect, but we are absolutely darn lucky. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Kinshasa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
From pests to heroes. Next, how rats could become critical critters. When disaster strikes, we turn to dogs for help with search and rescue operations. After all, they're called man's best friend for a reason. Rats, on the other hand, have a bad rap. Though, as Redmond Shannon explains, researchers in Africa are trying to turn the rodents into rescuers.
Man's best friend may soon have some smaller teammates on the search and rescue squad. Say hello to hero rats. These rodents are in training in Tanzania to help researchers locate and communicate with earthquake victims. How would that work exactly? Let the researchers explain.
Typically with dogs, they just go around the perimeter of a debris site, but with our rats, we're hoping they can actually penetrate inside the debris and get closer to victims.
The rats will wear tiny backpacks, kind of like in Paw Patrol or Batman's utility belt. It has a camera, a precision location transmitter, and even a two-way radio that rescuers could use to speak with anyone trapped.
When they get close to a human, they'll trigger a switch that's integrated into this backpack, and that will give us, in theory, a very precise location of exactly where those victims are hidden.
Of course, it may not be for everyone. You can imagine a traumatized person buried under rubble for hours or days may not want to be suddenly confronted with a rat.
So one thing that we've been considering is that they might play a message, like an audio recording that says something like, "I am a rescue rat, I'm well trained, I'm here to help you," something along those lines.
The NGO Apopo has already trained rats for other heroic missions, such as sniffing out landmines and even detecting tuberculosis. The goal is to eventually deploy fully trained rats to earthquake zones in Turkey.
And one of them is actually named after my nephew. His name is Daniel. And so I'm very biased, and he's one of my favourites because he's top performing, but the main reason is that he's really sweet and cuddly.
Even if you don't agree, you can sponsor the programme by adopting a rat and potentially saving a life. Remember, not all heroes wear capes, some wear backpacks. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
To the very first hero in many of our lives, happy Father's Day. It is my first weekend as anchor of Global National, and on a personal note, I wanted to thank the man who got me here. My dad and biggest fan came to Canada as an immigrant in the 70s. He had no idea that his daughter would one day anchor a national newscast. And for the past 22 years, he's been sending me a note or giving me a phone call after every single broadcast. He unknowingly raised two journalists. My brother is also one. And it's because of his insatiable curiosity about the world. I mean, he would wake us up with news clippings to teach us about politics and democracy, and he asks more questions than any journalist I know. Happy Father's Day, Dad. We love you. That's Global National for this Sunday night. Neetu Garcha will be with you tomorrow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.